into a point of total destruction. Now, how does the Weimar Republic tie into this? The Weimar Republic was a part of Germany. And this is what the Weimar Republic basically too was formed after World War I believe, occurred. It was before the rise of Hitler that the Weimar Republic was formed. And this is what it says. The Weimar Republic, after the violence had quelled and after these things had happened after World War I, they worked from February to July of 1919, crafting a new constitution, which became law on August 11th. The drafters of this new constitution faced the difficult task of creating a government acceptable to both the political left and right. Without being too radical, they compromised to satisfy both groups. The conservatives, afraid of too much democracy, the framers also added elements such as Article 48, which allowed the president to assume emergency powers, suspend civil rights, and operate without the consent of the Reichstag for a limited period of time. So this was built a lot like our Constitution, okay? There is great similarities between the Constitution of the Weimar Republic and the United States of America. The chancellor appointed the cabinet members and oversaw day-to-day operations. And the chancellor usually came from the majority party in the say within all of those 459 seats available. Proportional representation later allowed more extremist parties, such as the Nazi Party, to gain influence. I'm giving you background here for a reason. So this is where it's going to start to get interesting with the Weimar Republic, because you're going to start to see daunting similarities between the United States and where we are at and what happened with Weimar. However, the Weimar Republic faced more immediate problems in early 1920 when a group of right-wing paramilitaries seized power in what became known as the Kapp Putsch. When Ebert sought the promised help of the army in maintaining control, he was told that the army does not fire on other army units. The military therefore made it clear that they were happy to fight the left, but would not take arms against the right wing, which is interesting. So they had these things kind of begin to go on in the Weimar Republic. The political violence tend to peak in 1923 with Hitler's attempted coup, which we'll get into. However, the challenges that they face now, the leaders of the Weimar Republic and the Reichstag and the Chancellor, there were a lot of challenges of an economic variety, particularly the burden placed upon them by the outgoing leadership of the Kaiser and the generals. You had the cost of World War I itself, because Germany was blamed and had to pay reparations. You had the Versailles Treaty that the Allies charged the Germans with paying staggering reparations for the cost of World War I, and while simultaneously occupying some of the most productive regions of Western Germany. So they lost about 13% of their territories, Germany, including areas accounting for 16% of coal, and 48% of iron production was taken away from them. So these high reparations had a devastating consequence on the cost of living. And by November of 1923, it took 4,200,000,000 marks to equal $1. 4,200,000,000. This is hyperinflation at its best, what happened here. So there was disastrous economic and social consequences, and many of the middle class found themselves destitute in the middle of this. Now, where it begins to really turn and look like what's happening in the United States is right here. So we see some of the issues that they suffered with inflation, with debt, with the debt ceiling getting higher, with all of these things going on as they've made this constitution that looks very similar to that of the United States of America. Now, what happened after this constitution was made in the Weimar Republic is Germany experienced its own roaring 20s until they were cut short by the Great Depression. Cities burgeoned with new arrivals from the countryside in search of jobs, setting the stage for vibrant urban life. So urban centers like Berlin became some of the most socially liberal places in Europe, much to the chagrin of conservative elites. Berlin had a thriving nightlife full of bars and cabarets. There were between 65 and 80 gay bars and 50 lesbian bars in the capital alone. Sexual liberation was a very real phenomenon, complete with this movement that was led by Dr. Magnus Hirschfeld, who was a German Jew. He was a German Jewish doctor who led this. So beginning in the 19th century, Germany was closely associated with homosexuality. And what happens is they started to use the words, I'm going to spell it like Queer. What happened too is you began to have a transgender movement that began to make a great push into the forefront of this. The Weimar Republic, the zenith of modernism, witnessed new social liberation and experimentation. They had films that they premiered having to do with this. They pushed for these rights to come to the forefront. Also, alongside reinventing traditional forms of artistic expression, Germans began interrogating gender roles. Interrogating gender roles, calling them into question, and interrogating sexual identities. This is where the Weimar Republic paves the way for the Third Reich. So they begin to interrogate gender roles and sexual identities. Now, and there is a historian called Clayton. His name is Clayton Wisnant. And his observation was, perhaps more than anywhere else, Weimar Germany became associated with experimentation in sexuality. And Berlin was the undisputed capital of Europe for this. And by 1900 alone, over 50,000 people that identified as LBGT, whatever other letter they want to use, they lived there, and countless more visited. And so by 1923, it was pegged with hundreds of bars and tons of nightlife for this is what happened. Now, they didn't censor them either. So it says associations offered opportunities for socializing and political organization. So this kind of atmosphere allowed opportunities for socializing and political organization. Crucially, relaxed rules of censorship allowed for the publications of dozens of novels and periodicals and personal ads, all having to do with this agenda. So this all began to completely just flourish and grow like weeds in the Weimar Republic. It began to grow like tares is what happened, because the tares grow up with the wheat. So they had images everywhere in magazines of this. They had it right in the forefront. They have professional photographs out there. They had nightlife. They had raucous music. They had all of this. Once evening fell, all of this happened. All the night walkers came out. So they all hid during the day. And once evening fell, all of this area turned into a complete concentrated cooking pot of this agenda. 1919. German Jews as well experience a period of increased social and economic freedom. So right before this happens too, what's happening at the same time is German Jews are experiencing more freedom, the more that these other areas of the Weimar Republic are being built up. Now, remember, this was led by a German Jew. So it was kind of, in a way, all connected. Culturally, the period produced important and lasting results. The Republic created little. This is what a historian, his name is Peter Gay, wrote. The Republic created little. It liberated what was already there. Now, it created little and it liberated what was already there. Let's talk about that. You have the same spirit, the same ruler of the darkness that has been coming back from empire after empire for different areas of the world over a large span of time, pushing the same agenda. So let's talk about the influence of Ishtar in the Weimar Republic in the United States for a moment. Ishtar, or Ashtoreth, as the Jews knew her, involved temple prostitution, men dressing up as women for ceremonies. So it involved those two things. Also, interestingly enough, Tammuz is thrown in there as being associated with this particular false god. And in Ezekiel, he talks about seeing women weeping for Tammuz. They were just crying out before Tammuz and worshiping Tammuz because they were all connected together. Ashtoreth and Tammuz and Baal, and they were all connected together in the same circle for these pagan nations. And this is also, I'm going to go on about Ishtar. Corresponding to Ishtar's own ability to transcend categories, the goddess of love enabled her followers to defy or even redefine social boundaries. What did they say happened in the Weimar Republic? They interrogated gender roles, social boundaries. They interrogated it. Enabled her followers to defy or even redefine social boundaries, particularly those related to gender roles. What did they do in the Weimar Republic? They interrogated gender roles. What did they do in the United States of America? They interrogated gender roles. What did they do at the Temple of Ishtar? They interrogated gender roles. They taught them to defy them. They taught them to call them into question. Men who became priests of Ishtar, known as Gala, would sometimes assume non-binary gender roles, dress in women's clothing, were allowed to engage in homosexuality. So if we think this is new, this is the same spirit that is finding different areas to try to raise up in to promote its agenda. And this is one of the last things that happened in the Weimar Republic before it fell to the Third Reich. The United States of America is now fastly approaching that fork in the road where we're going to have to choose this day whom we will serve. Priests of Ishtar were known as Gala. What is the Met event called? Where everybody dresses up, and many of them dress up in these androgynous outfits. What is the Met event every year called? A gala. It's called a gala. That is not coincidental. What do some men do at the Met Gala? They dress up like women. This is all connected. It is all through the same spirit that is finding different areas of the world to raise up the same agenda in and put it forth. Okay, let's go on. However, the global economic downturn created by the Great Depression in America had devastating repercussions for the Weimar Republic. As the panic hit Wall Street, the U.S. government pressed its former allies, Britain and France, to repay their war debts. Not having the money, Britain and France pressed Germany for more reparation payments, causing an economic depression. The German government faced the classic dilemma: cut government spending in an attempt to balance the budget, or increase it in an attempt to jumpstart the economy. Heinrich Brüning, who became chancellor in 1930, chose the deeply unpopular option of an austerity program, which cut spending, and those programs designed precisely to help those most in need. So when Germany's debt became so great and they were pressed to pay it, one of the first things they did is they cut all programs to help those that were most in need in Germany. That's what they did. That was one of the number one things they did. Economic hardship combined with a general distrust of the Weimar system to destabilize parliamentary politics. Majorities and even coalitions in the Reichstag were difficult to form among an increasing large number of extremist parties. So what this was breeding was an extremist party to arise. This was the breeding ground for extremist parties. What has happened in Washington, D.C.? It was a breeding ground for an extremist party to arise that is literally trying to enslave America and cause it to forsake everything it was raised up to be. Because when you lower the moral standard, when you take away moral boundaries, it becomes a breeding ground for an extremist group to arise, and they will call you exactly what they are. So many times people that are conservatives are called extremists. The problem is they're being called the extremists by the people on the left that are a few. Nobody could get majority because you had more extremist groups and offshoots popping up in the Reichstag. One of the last things to go on in the Weimar Republic that spiritually weakened it and allowed the path for Hitler was this blatant push for an agenda that had to do with swapping, that had to do with calling into scrutiny gender roles, which had to do with transgenderism, which had to do with LGBTQ, which had to do with all of this. Why was that the last thing that weakened it? Because it weakened it spiritually, it weakened the family unit, the country's morals were put in the toilet, and it opened the door spiritually for the entire nation to be ensnared and enslaved by a very high-ranking ruler of the darkness of this world. So by them giving that constitution and allowing so many freedoms for people to do whatever they wanted, what happened is the moral code was lowered more and more and more. And that was one of the last things that happened was this movement, was this agenda arose and spread like wildfire in the Weimar Republic. And it weakened it to a point, it helped weaken it, that it paved the way for the rise of the Nazi Party. It paved the way for it. There was no spirit, there was not enough spiritual standing in Germany to stand against it. There wasn't enough order. There wasn't enough of a foundation in Germany left to withstand it. And so let's go on about what happened. Interestingly enough, I will say this too. The police tolerated all of it in Germany. So all of the bars and all of the agenda, what did the police do? They stood by and they tolerated it. They did nothing to stop it. They allowed it to go on. I guess they were given orders to allow it to go on, which is interesting. And they kind of looked the other way. So who was supposed to uphold the law kind of helped the people do what thou wilt, because it's the whole of the law. Aleister Crowley, who is one of the most wicked men who ever lived, he said, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law. Do whatever you want, and that's the law. And that's kind of what they were doing in Germany at the time. What they're doing in the United States of America. Do whatever you want, and that's the law. Do what thou wilt, and that's the law. That is the law the enemy wants you to live by, because it takes you away from the law of God. It takes you away from relationship with God, and it totally pulls you into the things of the flesh. And it pulls you into the order of the demonic, where they have very well mobilized to continue these interests. Make no mistake about it. The demonic is incredibly mobilized. The kingdom of darkness is orderly in its hierarchy. They like to cause chaos in other people's lives, but they are highly mobilized and they are very orderly. And this is where the United States of America, especially the church, has to understand. God is a God of law and order. We should even be more mobilized, more in order, more focused on the mission that God has given us, because they sure are. because they have done this over and over again. Over spans of thousands of years, they've done this. The same ruler of the darkness of this world started back in the Assyrian Empire, which we'll get to, started back with the Assyrians, started back with Mesopotamia, and over periods of time worked its way back in to different civilizations. I'll show you something else biblically where this shows up again, where this same spirit having to do with this prostitution and these other things of a sexual nature shows up again. It flourished in the Philistine towns who worshipped Dagon. So Dagon is another player. I call this the rise of the Dagon faction in the United States of America, because that ruler of the darkness and that false god, half man, half fish, highly seducing and destructive spirit, was documented. I believe it was in the book of Judges. It's also documented. Dagon himself is documented when the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant and placed it before Dagon. I think that is First Kings. If it's not First Kings, it's Second Kings. But Judges 16, verses 1 through 3. Now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there and went into her. When it was told to the Gazites, saying, Samson has come here, they surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. And they kept silent all night, saying, let us wait until the morning light, when we will kill him. Now Samson lay until midnight, and at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the city gate and the two posts, pulled them up along with the bars. Then he put them on his shoulders and carried them up to the top of the mountain, which is opposite Hebron. So we see again where there is pagan worship, where you see Ishtar, where you see Dagon, you see prostitution, you see the scrutiny of gender roles, you see these agendas pop up. In places where there is much freedom and with little moral boundaries and much idolatry with an emphasis on religion, not on a relationship with the Lord, prostitution and perversion flourishes because it is utilized in the realm of the spirit to create soul ties and put people in bondage to highly destructive, seducing spirits. And those people in bondage then do their bidding. They can go on and say, oh no, they don't really exist. Satan doesn't exist. That's exactly what he wants you to think. Well, he's got you tied every which way to Sunday to do his bidding. Ephesians chapter 4, verse 17 through 19. So this I say and affirm together with the Lord, that you walk no longer just as the Gentiles also walk, in the futility of their mind, being darkened in their understanding, excluded from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart. And they, having become callous, have given themselves over to sensuality, for the practice of every kind of impurity with greediness. So what is at the root of this? What was at the root of this with the Weimar Republic, with the United States of America? It's greediness. Is I want what my flesh wants, and I don't care what I have to do to get it. And it becomes where we are not going to listen to God. We are not going to listen to any authority. We're going to give ourselves over to this, but they're giving themselves over to these rulers of the darkness that will allure them, enslave them, use them, and then destroy them. So Germany, now this is interesting too, because it was a German Jew who was at the epicenter of this entire movement in Germany. When it came to the Weimar Republic, it was a German Jew that was at the center of that. He was a doctor, and they had forsaken, meaning this German Jew and those who were with him had forsaken the law of God and gone in the way of Baal and the Ashtoreths or the Ishtars, which assisted to open the gate for one to arise and oppress and persecute them in horrific ways. We have seen a rise of this in the nation that is being rushed at a feverish pace right now. This is being rushed at a feverish pace. And we're going to get into why this is Egypt 2.0. But this is like Egypt 2.0, where a new Pharaoh arises who didn't know Joseph. And the Jews that had gone into Egypt were Egyptian practices with practices of Almighty God that God had given them, and they were mixing these and opened the door for what? Enslavement. It was the same here. They were mixing things in the Weimar Republic, the ways of the Baals and the Ishtars with the ways of God, and it opened the door once again for this horrific, horrible event to occur. Now, I'm going to show you something, because we've got this going on all over in this nation, but I'm going to show you how they are making a full court press right now and a blitz for this. They're trying to do exactly what they did in the Weimar Republic. Target, of all places, has joined ranks now with this brand of clothing to be more of the kingdom of darkness, we'll say, to create a pride collection. The name of the brand is I'm going to say the word allegedly, Pralin. And it is known for selling merchandise that has much images of the kingdom of darkness on it. Some of it even glorifies violence to create products for its pride collection. At one point, Target sold 3 of these items, a messenger bag saying "We belong everywhere." And it had apparently a trans flag and planets on it, a tote that had another message on it that I'm not even going to say, beneath a UFO, and a cure transphobia, not trans people sweatshirt. However, the sweatshirt remains for sale, but there's an issue with this sweatshirt. This sweatshirt has an image, a variation of the caduceus symbol on it. So there's the sweatshirt. Isn't it interesting they chose the Target of all places, the word target? What is a target? It's something you want to what? Hit. It's something a marksman wants to hit. It's something you aim for. And they've done this with Target. Now, this caduceus symbol, because this is a variation of the caduceus. The caduceus, because the regular snake on the pole without the wings, that's the rod of I think his name is Asclepius, who is the false god of Greek medicine. The caduceus is the symbol of Hermes or Mercury in Greek and Roman mythology. It's a symbol identified with thieves, merchants, and messengers. And Mercury was said to be the patron of thieves and outlaws, not a desirable protector of physicians. So isn't it interesting? The symbol they're using is identified with thieves. And there goes Grace flying over my head and landing on the computer as I say that. Identified with thieves. That's what that symbol is identified with. And with these false gods of Hermes and Mercury and others. Why? John 10:10 says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came so that they would have life and have it abundantly. One of these items that this collection touted at Target at one point is "We belong everywhere." That's what it says. We belong everywhere. Well, isn't that just what the demonic wants? To have their agendas influencing high places and identified everywhere. It's a very sobering statement, because this is not what the founding fathers had in mind. They did not have in mind that the minority would be catered to, meaning that for the good of the nation standing and being raised up and for freedom of religion, this has to stay a Christian nation, and this has to stay in order, and we have to uphold the Constitution. Otherwise, we see happening here, we see what happened in the Weimar Republic. It runs in tandem. Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. Pride goes before destruction. What is this collection called? The Pride Collection. Goes ahead of destruction. Before destruction comes, pride comes. Before the Weimar Republic and their constitution fell to the Third Reich, what went before it? Pride. What came after it? Destruction. And a haughty spirit before stumbling. Within the month of March of this year, some things happened. Now, I'm going to tell you the first thing that happened. On March 1st, news broke. Now, I'm going to show you. This is how it all connects right now. The United States, Weimar Republic, everything that's going on. A transgender video game developer launched a game where players can hunt down critics of transgenderism, including Catholic priests, and kill them in a bloody first-person, event. It's called, and the name of the game has a very weird name, but the game is based on the classic Nazi fighting game Wolfenstein 3D. So they named it Turfstein 3D, but the game is based on the classic Nazi fighting game Wolfenstein 3D. Well, that's what rose after the fall of the Weimar Republic. This is all connected. It's one of the, let me just take a moment here so I know where I want to go with this, because it's so involved that I'm kind of like making sure that we just methodically go through this and prophetically, as the Lord gives me utterance in going through this, we take a moment to talk about it. But this Wolfenstein game involved the main character navigating Nazi bases and taking out the villainous occupants with a wide array of deadly weapons. So they're equating those that don't agree with them to Nazis. They're equating those that don't agree with them to Nazis. So all of this, because the anti-gun agenda and all of this comes out of these same groups. So while they're screaming anti-gun and more gun control, they're doing nothing but promoting violence through this. While they're screaming that, the Democrats aren't saying anything in D.C. about these violent video games, about this video game that came out. They're being mum on it. So while they're yelling about all sorts of control, they are promoting a ton of violence at the same time, because they really don't want. They want you to think they are against the very thing they are promoting. Let's put it that way. So this isn't an accident that this came out. When it came out, this isn't an accident that it's connected to this Wolfenstein game involving Nazis. This is no accident. They're trying to use what? Propaganda to influence people in the direction they want them to go. That was one of the experiments, and Jonah said this to me yesterday, that one of the experiments that came out of Germany was that the media could be used as an enormous propaganda tool to influence people to even be okay with harming innocent children, to make them okay with total destruction of a group. That was one of the experiments that came out of all of that, was that realizing the media could be used as propaganda to influence people to come into agreement with horrible things. Now, towards the end of March, after this video game comes out the beginning of March, the Kingdom of Darkness will always announce, or you will see a precursor to something coming out. So the Kingdom of Darkness will always put out a precursor before something happens many times. So you will see something come out first as a precursor, and then you will see an event. Towards the end of March, that horrific school shooting in Nashville happened. The name of the school was Covenant. The name of the school was Covenant. The Covenant is under attack. And there was a person that was in this particular movement we're talking about that went in and killed these people. What are the odds of both of these, the video game and then this incident, happening in the month of March, which is the month of Purim, which is the month that Haman wanted to destroy the people of God? What are the odds that both of these would come out in the month of March? One at the beginning and one at the end. Like I said, Weimar Republic. And I will tell you, when the demonic is welcomed into a nation in high places, and the believer's authority, the authority of the third heaven, is not utilized, they will advance their agenda. They will take advantage of that. They will go for it. That's why they want so bad to weaken the church. That's why they want to make the church come into compliance. That's why they want to make the people of God come into compliance with what they want, because it weakens the authority of the believer and it allows the kingdom of darkness to advance. They will kill, steal, and destroy if given the opportunity. They have come to steal, kill, and destroy. God is long-suffering. He is merciful. He loves these people that are incredibly deceived. He doesn't want to see them deceived, but everyone's got a free will and everyone's got a choice. And the Lord says to everybody, choose this day whom you will serve. This was Egypt 2.0. What happened? This was the revenge of that spirit that caused Pharaoh to develop a disdain for the people of God. This is the Empire Strikes Back. That's what the Weimar Republic falling and the rise of the Third Reich, that was the Empire Strikes Back, because Reich means empire in German. And so this was what was happening now. The empire was striking back. The rulers of the darkness were striking back because of what happened, and they couldn't complete their mission long ago in Egypt. So they have decided to come back full circle and try it again. Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 11. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. He said to his people, behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or shrewdly, or else they will multiply. And in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us and fight against us and depart from the land. So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Ramses. So this is the same repeat of the same cycle, manifesting in different ways in different parts of the world. Now, what also happened is the scapegoat aspect. So we're going to get into that now. The German defeat from World War I was very hard on many of the Germans to swallow. It was a hard pill to swallow. It was difficult for them to accept. And Hitler, remember, is coming up the ranks as this is happening. Now, in this case with Germany, you were dealing with this radicalism coming from the right wing. What we're dealing with it in our nation is coming from the left wing. Okay, so that's different. That is the difference here. And Germany tried to there's something that began to circulate within Germany as this is going on in the Weimar Republic, as this German Jew is leading this roaring 20s cabaret LGBTQ agenda, and this is all going on. They started to hold the Jews, the Social Democrats, and the communists responsible for them losing the war. So they started to blame them for what happened to them, not from their own bad decisions. They started to look to blame groups for what happened to them, which is known as the scapegoat method. Now, scapegoats in the Bible, this is what scapegoats were, just to give you an idea. You see it in Leviticus, and Aaron then completed the ministries of his atonement work, after which he laid both his hands on the head of a live goat and confessed over it all the iniquities of the people of Israel and all their transgressions and all their sins. And he put them on the head of the goat and sent it away into the wilderness by the hand of a man who is in readiness. That's Leviticus 16:21. The man then let the goat go free in the wilderness, Leviticus 16:22. Once the scapegoat was sent to the wilderness, the sins of the people, quote, escaped through the atoning work done by use of him. The man who led the scapegoat to Azazel had to wash his clothes and bathe before he could come back into the camp. And many times that goat was killed. So this becomes the scapegoat method, where they then try to completely blame and want to harm a group for their own shortcomings. So let's go on. A combination of political and economic dissatisfaction, some of it dating back to the founding of the Republic, helped create the conditions for Hitler's rise to power. By drawing together the fringe nationalist parties into the Nazi Party, Hitler was able to gain a sufficient number of seats in the Reichstag to make him a political player. Eventually, now this is interesting because we see this going on the left side right now. But this is what it says. Eventually, conservatives hoping to control him and capitalize on his popularity brought him into government. Eventually, conservatives hoping to control him and capitalize on his popularity brought him into government. Wrong motive. Wrong motive. Oh, we're just going to bring him in because we think we can control him and capitalize off of him. This is why this whole thing backfired. However, Hitler used the weaknesses written into the Weimar Constitution, like Article 48, which allowed him to become a complete dictator for a period, to subvert it and assume dictatorial power. Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution allowed the German president to declare a state of emergency in Germany in times of national danger and to rule as a dictator for short periods of time. Article 48, 4 plus 8 equals 12. 12 biblically, there were 12 tribes of Israel, and 12 is associated with government and rule. The Weimar Republic ended with Hitler's appointment as chancellor. He does to try to get all the other Germans on his side because he knew how they felt because of World War I. He starts blaming Jews, traitors, communists on the reasons the Weimar democracy failed. This is what he does. This was his tactic. He's going to blame these groups for the reason the Weimar democracy failed, when really it failed because it had no firm foundation. It had no spiritual foundation. It had no moral boundaries. Everyone was doing whatever they wanted, and there was no clear leadership. That's why it failed. So, of parties to back Hitler. So when they saw that the communists had gained some seats, the other parties panicked and thought Hitler was their solution to that. You see, this is why this is such a this is a grave lesson for the United States of America right now and what went on, because they panicked because they saw the communists had gained some seats, but they didn't realize the greater of two evils was Hitler at that point. It wasn't necessarily the communists. And so they made an emotional decision, and they went and they backed his party. Finally, on January 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg reluctantly agreed to choose Hitler as the new chancellor. Reluctantly agreed. Hitler promised to observe the Weimar Constitution. Now, this is a hallmark of those under the influence of the spirit of Antichrist and these rulers of the darkness, these Baals and these Ishtars. They promise to uphold the law. And once they have power, they try and destroy it and replace it with a highly oppressive, destructive dictatorship. So they promise to uphold what they truly want to destroy and form a broad coalition government to solve the economic crisis. So he promised to solve the economic crisis. So he came as the answer to that. The politicians advising Hindenburg told him they could control the upstart from Bavaria. One political leader made a comment and said, in 2 months, we'll have pushed Hitler into a corner so hard he'll be squeaking. Hitler blames the communists. This event there was a fire. It was purposely started. This fire was purposely done by the Nazi faction so that Hitler could blame another party and gain more control of Germany. He issued a temporary decree suspending constitutional rights to crush the communists. So he used this to invoke Article 48 to become the dictator, claiming the communists set the fire. They needed to be crushed when it was really the Nazis who set the fire. Create a catastrophe and blame the party you want to destroy. January 6th was the Reichstag fire. January 6th was the Reichstag fire. In March of 1933, with close to 6 million Germans unemployed, the Nazi Party won 44% of the Reichstag seats with the support of smaller parties. Now there was a majority commanded to form a new government. Hitler submitted something called an Enabling Act, calling for the Reichstag to transfer its lawmaking powers to him. The law also allowed Hitler to ignore any provisions of the Constitution. This law allowed him to dump the Constitution. The Constitution that was very similar to ours, this Enabling Act allowed him to dump it. The very Constitution he promised to uphold, the breaking of the agreement to uphold law and order, which is another hallmark of the spirit of Antichrist and of these high-ranking members of the rulers of the darkness of this world, the Baals and the Ashtoreths. This happening foreshadowed the same tactic also that the man of sin, the Antichrist, in Daniel and Revelation that is spoken of, will use. That is still to come. So this is the same tactic, same spirits, same tactic that we see in Daniel and Revelation that is still to come. It's the same tactic here because they are trying to dismantle the Constitution that they swore to uphold to give themselves undue dictatorial power. It's the same thing. According to Daniel 9:27, we're going to just go into this for a moment. The tribulation begins with the signing of a peace treaty between the Antichrist and Israel, intended to be for 1 or 7, that is, a set of 7 years. But the 7 is divided in halves. Midway through the 7 years, the Antichrist breaks down the treaty, or breaks the treaty, and sets up in the temple a sacrilegious object, also known as the abomination that causes desolation. The phrase in the middle indicates that the first half of the tribulation lasts 3.5 years, 1,260 days. Likewise, the second half of the tribulation lasts another 1,260 days, or another 3.5 years, for a total of 7 years. So it's interesting because this is the same tactic. Gain power, promise to uphold the law, tell you they're going to take care of the economic crisis, and then break everything you promised. It's the same tactic. The law to remedy the distress of the people and the Reich is known as the Enabling Act. That was passed on March 23rd, 1933, and proclaimed the next day. It became the cornerstone of Adolf Hitler's dictatorship. The act allowed him to enact laws, including ones that violated the Weimar Constitution, without approval of either parliament or empire. This was, like I said, the empire strikes back. Now, the question of just how the Weimar Republic became the Third Reich is more relevant than ever. There are many parallels to U.S. politics, often where least expected. So we've got a lot of these parallels that we see happening right now, except we're dealing with it on the left. So we're dealing with it on the left radical side. They dealt with it on the way right radical side. Often where we least expected, conservative elites who thought they could use the Nazis to their own ends for German rearmament, for example, emerge as perhaps the clearest facilitators of Hitler's rise. But the left, with its tendency toward factionalism, is also implicated. Among the most tragic, short-sighted decision in a book full of them is the German Communist Party's decision to identify the Social Democratic Party, not the Nazis, as their enemy. So the Communist Party made the mistake as identifying the Social Democratic Party as their enemy, the ones that wanted to have a democracy, the one that wanted democracy upheld, the one that wanted Germany to have a democratic process. They identified them as the enemy and not the Nazis. And that's what the enemy will do. The enemy will blind you. He will short-sight your vision, and he will turn your vision on something else and make you hyper-focus on that, so then he can raise up what he wants to raise up. Once a critical mass of the left had abandoned a commitment to democracy, the center could not hold against the far right. So in their cases, it was the left that was for democracy. And in the weight of all of this, they completely abandoned it. And the center could not hold against this crushing Nazi party that was moving like a tidal wave across Germany. So in our nation, we have the conservative side trying to uphold a republic and want a fair democratic process. And we have the left radical side that is trying to bring this tidal wave to crush that. So in our case, it's switched. The most striking revelation is one of the most striking revelations of this is how progressive the Weimar Republic was. This was a model democracy with a constitution that included proportional representation. Berlin was a diverse city, a capital of culture, and leftist politics. So this is one of the most striking revelations that come out of the Weimar Republic, as I've got two birds now on the post. I got two birds now on the perch as I'm teaching this here. I'll see if I can move Grace in so you can see her. I don't know if you could see her or not. Did she come in? Yeah, there's her tail. Okay. A doomed democracy under siege from all sides. So this is what this was, a doomed democracy that was brought under siege from all sides, that had no spiritual defense, had no moral boundaries, had no moral code. And the one thing that can be said in defense of the Weimar Germans is that they did not know how bad it could get. They were totally blind and ignorant to the fact of how bad this could all really get. Okay, let me just go down because Chet actually just put my page up. I'm not even kidding you. Okay, here it is. So while they were having their roaring 20s and were promoting their trans movements and were promoting all of this cabarets and were promoting all of this, while they were engaging in the sins of the flesh, the Nazi Party was building its faction. While they were engaging in the things of the flesh and the fleeting desires, the Nazi Party was building up its arsenal, building up its faction, building up its leaders. Very similar to today. The difference with the United States of America is that we have a covenant with Almighty God. God takes interest in what ultimately what happens to that covenant. Many of us operate in the believer's authority. There are more of us in this nation that are getting discontent and upset with what we see happening. And that is what it took in Germany. That never happened. Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Confessing Church only got 3,000 of 18,000 Protestant pastors to sign the document, the Confessing Church, to stand against this rising Nazi faction. Had 3,000 more churches and leaders signed it, Hitler would have never came to power. You see, they were more busy with the fleshly desires than they were confessing before God, making a plan, and standing in the courage of their convictions. Dietrich Bonhoeffer himself said the church is the conscience of the state. The conscience left. The conscience left the Weimar Republic. There really wasn't a conscience. It was seared. And when there's no conscience, the mind goes to a very dark place. When there's no conscience, the nation goes to a very dark place. It's no different here. Back in 2011, former German Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder made a remarkable statement. He said, "The current economic crisis makes it relentlessly clear that we cannot have a common currency zone without a common fiscal, economic, and social policy. We will have to give up national sovereignty." So now we're fast forwarding to 2011 in Germany. And here we go again. We have to give up national sovereignty. We cannot have a common currency zone with a common fiscal, economic, and social policy for the European Union. We all have to give up our national sovereignty. That is the goal of globalists and those under the spirit of Antichrist. Those that serve the Baals and the Ashtoreths. Give up national sovereignty. Herd the people like cattle to give up their sovereignty and be joined to other nations to make a zone. You think zoning for homes in this nation and areas in states is something harmless? You think zoning is something that they just thought up? They have been slowly trying to zone us for years, inching us towards their world order. This is now beginning to happen. Nations in Europe are today giving up their sovereignty to make the European Union work. So once again, it's coming full circle. The same cycle, the same spirits. The British left the EU in 2016 because some didn't like that fact about giving up national sovereignty. But when all give up their sovereignty, someone is in charge. And you may not like that someone. And once your sovereignty is gone, your say in trying to get that someone out becomes incredibly minuscule. Who will that someone be then? If they all give up national sovereignty, if the United States were to give up national sovereignty. September 9th, 2021, the Center for Global Development. Germany is the world's second largest development donor after the U.S. and the European Union's largest aid provider. And yet its financial heft is not commensurate with its positioning on development in the EU. For the second time, Germany reached the aid target of 0.7% of gross national income in 2020, making significant contributions to the global pandemic response, including through EU, COVAX, and the WHO. With a new government taking over the helm of the country and building on its financial firepower, Germany now has the opportunity to fully embrace a leadership role in the EU. To fully embrace a leadership role in the EU. Giving up national sovereignty. Someone's got to lead. Looks like who wants to lead again? It's Germany as an agenda setter in development, driving forward innovative ideas rather than as a mere broker. So what they're saying is Germany has the ability to lead the EU and completely influence and drive it the way it wants it to go. Now, Revelation chapter 17, John described a span of centuries from the Middle Ages to our time, during which successive empires rose and fell. Here is how it reads. Here is the mind which he has wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sits. There are also 7 kings. 5 have fallen, 1 is, and the other has not yet come. And when he comes, he must continue a short time. That's Revelation 17, 9 through 10. John was saying there were to be 7 leaders over 7 successive kingdoms. Who were those leaders? Well, this individual seems to have the opinion you had Justinian, who united the eastern and western sections of the Roman Empire in 556 AD. Charlemagne, who was crowned in 800 AD. Otto the Great, crowned as Holy Roman Emperor in 962 AD. Charles V in 1530 AD. Napoleon, whose empire began in 1804, and the German-Italian alliance, which led to the Hitler-Mussolini axis of powers of World War II. So these are of the opinion that these are the first 6 of 7 kings. The final king will reign over 10 other kings. The final king will reign over 10 other kings just before Jesus Christ returns. and will attempt to fight against the Son of God. The 10 horns which you saw are 10 kings who have received no kingdoms as of yet, but they receive authority for 1 hour as king with the beast. These are of one mind, and they will give their power and authority, which means they will give up their sovereignty to the beast. That's Revelation 17:12 through 13. You might ask, what's wrong with Germany taking a more dominant role on the European continent? After all, isn't Germany one of America's closest allies? They are friends of America for now. For now. But it's a good thing to just kind of stop and think about the fact that just short of 70 years ago, Britain, France, them closely, and what happens. Because I'm telling you, they have been building up their alliance and their arms and their influence, and everyone's yelling about the BRICS nations, and everyone's yelling about Iran, and everyone's yelling about China. And here's Germany building themselves up to have complete influence over the European Union. That is their goal. That looks to be their goal. But we see the same thing happening in the United States of America. And this is why we have to be aware.